you've got it now.
All right. So we're recording.
Very good. Okay, so I'm trying to get to where I'm speaker view. Okay, let's just go with this. So again, we're going to give information that you may already know. We're going to ask that you open your hearts and take this in emotionally more than with your thinking mind. And that will guide our discussions. We plan to have 2 breakout sessions. We plan to do a little bit of presentation here at the beginning. And I kind of want to open sacred space in an unusual way. I kind of want to present a little, almost a prayer for guidance. So let's take just a deep breath together in and get centered and let go of all our troubles and worries and thoughts about tomorrow, and then out, exhale. And one more time, in together and out. So 500 years ago, Europeans came to Turtle Island and began to exterminate the native peoples living here. They did this for so-called wealth. They did it with an insane sense of entitlement. They did it using guns against people of all ages. And they did it with contempt, usually not even learning the true names of those they killed. It didn't take long before these colonizers were bringing slaves into their midst, both white indentured servants dragged from their European homeland and black people stolen from their family and land in Africa. Today, now, we, the wealth-crazed descendants of those first colonizers, are destroying ourselves. Now we who still live reach back to the ancestors of those who were terribly wronged before. We are sorry for what has been wrought in the name of so-called civilization. We ask for help to clear this sickness from our minds, to lead us to a path out of this greedy, evil darkness and back into the light of our sun once more. Thus the circle can again be complete. We honor you, our ancestors, by asking for your help, and we ask with all humility as a people who have gone far astray but see the errors of our ways. This is a great thing we ask, but you are a great people with time-tested ways of seeing that we no longer teach our children. We will make mistakes, but with the help of our ancestors, for we are all indigenous in our hearts, we will find our way. This evening is another step on this path of healing. Aho.
Oh.
So the title of this presentation was Racism and Capitalism, and it was supposed to be in October, and we pulled it forward here because it seemed more appropriate. We're going to focus a little bit on the capitalism piece, a lot on the racism piece. But I just want to present as we begin this evening. As Pachamama Alliance, we focus on environmental sustainability, and it's capitalism's oppression which is killing our planet. We focus on social justice, and it's police oppression which is killing our neighborhoods and families. And we focus on spiritual fulfillment. And the way we do healthcare in this racist capitalist system, that oppression in our system of healthcare is killing our spirit. Now, I just want to share with us a very short audio clip. This was recorded at a presentation at a meeting in Minneapolis the Sunday after George Floyd was killed. And I think it gives us a little bit of perspective about what was going on at that point with the protests that we probably weren't hearing on our news. And so I'm going to first share my screen with audio, and then I'm going to go light this up.
This country is supposed to be about the land of the free for all. It has not been free for black people, and we are tired. Don't talk to us about looting. Y'all are the looters. America has looted black people. America looted the Native Americans when they first came here. So looting is what you do. We learned it from you. We learned violence from you. We learned violence from you. The violence was what we learned from you. So if you want us to do better, then damn it, you do better.
So a little bit of history, a little bit of anger, certainly I would say justified anger. But again, that's probably not something that we have a good handle on. One of the things I'm going to focus on tonight, besides the capitalism piece and the healthcare piece, is the systemic nature of what's going on. And if we think about the American education system, it's intended to churn out workers who can plug into the existing structure of a job and not cause too much trouble. Few of us in our education system get any sense of our true or deep identity as an individual. That's a soft skill and not helpful in a worker who shouldn't question their role on the job. In a system in which crucial needs can only be met by the use of fiat currency or debt, this also sends a clear message that my work is who I am. It is so key to identity that if I ask someone, "Who are you?" many people will tell me what they do. I'm a welder, for instance. What does it do to a person's self-image if they had work but lost it? What if they only have menial work? What if they're newly released from an unjust incarceration but can no longer find a job because of check-the-box employment applications or the loss of a certification or license necessary to do their work? We are so much more than our salary and our work output. But could you understand anything about this if you were stuck trying to meet your own and your family's basic needs for food and shelter? Every institution, because it is critical to the functioning of the economy, has racism in its DNA. Whenever possible, every aspect of our lives together has been turned into a profit-making opportunity. Capitalism is part of everything, and that means racism is too. America is profitable and economically dominant precisely because the elite reap more rent using both labor slaves and debt slaves than would be moral or acceptable in a system that is grounded in fairness, equity, compassion, and reverence for the common good. Profit is only available to the extent that productivity is privatized, not socialized. Slavery didn't only prevent a sustainable social contract that supports everyone. It meant that social and economic exploitation is required. It meant that America could never truly be democratic, one person, one vote. It has become much more unequal, more money, more votes. Exploitation means the strong survive the longest, the psychopaths rise to positions of control, and ruthlessness is rewarded more than compassion because it treats people as property, just as objects to be sold and thus result in more profit. For most of us, we have to work until we die. And increasingly, we have to crowdfund, beg, or do something else to get enough food and medicine to support ourselves and our families. Conversely, when we cooperate, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Together, we lift each other higher than any one of us can climb alone. Slavery only diminishes the commons that we all have to share until no one has anything of any true value. Remember, real value, real wealth is healthy communities, healthy relationships, and healthy nature. No known civilization or empire has ever lasted by pulling oneself up by one's own bootstraps. That requires the inhuman ability to levitate. Billionaires only arise from the backs of slaves. Yes, really. What we have now are martyrs willing to die for, quote, just the right to hate others. We only approach being truly civil, as in civilized, by approaching it together. Instead of just talking about the problems today, politics, economy, culture, relationships, from the standpoint of keeping the same basic paradigm and just voting in another lifelong politician or repealing a bad law, can we start to talk about actually setting the old ways aside and doing something completely different? It's difficult, of course. We have all played, and most of us have played well within the rules of the game. We feel we deserve the promised reward. But is your heart and soul comfortable with just making small adjustments? Or do you instead resonate with making a more beautiful, a more just, a more sustainable, a more compassionate community of life in all its forms? Not asking for a vow of change, rather just opening a space to explore a bit of what it might be like to live from our hearts. I'm going to change gears just a little bit. I recently saw an interview with, the host of the interview was Robert Reich, and he was interviewing Reverend William Barber. And Reverend Barber talked about 5 interlocking injustices. The first is systemic racism, and he points to voter suppression, underfunding of schools, police selective violence, mistreatment of First Nations people and immigrants, as well as descendants of slaves and current slaves, systemic racism. He talks about number 2, systemic poverty. Do you know that 43% of Americans are categorized as poor because those 43%, the bottom 43% of the income in this country, average less than $18,000 per year in income? 43% of Americans are in that position. 62 million Americans work at a less than living wage. And 40% of children qualify for free lunches at school. This in supposedly the richest country on earth. And so that's the systemic poverty piece. Number 3 is systemic environmental devastation in the name of profit. He says 4 million people can buy unleaded gas, but not unleaded water. And Flint is not the only or the most toxic water in an American city. We have Superfund sites, hundreds of Superfund sites. I want to talk about Houston after Harvey. So 6 weeks after Harvey flooded Houston, the University of Houston went in and did a sample from 1,300 homes, always from the second floor of the home. And on the second floor of these homes, 6 weeks after Harvey, they found 13,000 times the established limit of E. coli bacteria. And yet, have you heard of any attempt to clean the city of Houston to get rid of? No, of course not, because that costs too much money. So here we go, systemic environmental devastation. Number 4 that he points to is systemic war. The profits from killing go to the military-industrial complex, but not for services for people. We pass along taxpayer dollars in the forms of weapon and training to militarize all the police. Polly's going to talk about that in just another moment here. Because there's never enough profit from the few wars we can wage at any time. So we're going to take taxpayer dollars and fund the police as well as our military overseas. So Reverend Barber then says the fifth part, that the fifth intersectionality here is religious nationalism, the false narrative of American exceptionalism, and the so-called, and I say so-called, Christian values, because to be blunt, if people were to follow Jesus's example, we would not be seeing the issues we're having today. And it is this religious nationalism that blesses the first 4 injustices and calls them moral, allows them to continue. I'm going to say one more piece, and this is in terms of how we all might react inappropriately, or we might have feelings that have been trained into us by the culture that don't serve us. I was watching a documentary last week, and it was about the Black Panther Party. And they were showing They were showing some of the news footage from the day that the Black Panther Party from Oakland went up to Sacramento and went right to the state capitol building carrying their guns to make a statement about what they wanted to see happen to make a change in Oakland and to change this racist country. And the news coverage was saying the Negroes were carrying guns. And that had its impact. It did its job by making people afraid. So I just want to point out the difference between hearing that on the news, the Negroes were carrying guns, how you would react, or how you did react recently when there were conservatives, militia groups in Wisconsin showing up at the Wisconsin State Capitol building carrying their guns and complaining about the COVID lockdown. And so maybe not anybody in this group, because we're more aware than most, but a lot of people in this country would react very differently to hearing these white people carrying guns went to the Capitol to protest the lockdown versus these Black people were carrying guns and went to the Capitol trying to get justice. That would land totally differently with most of this country. And so that's the systemic piece, the culture. I'm trying to point out the culture that brings us to this point where we would react differently based on skin color when the same basic thing is happening, carrying a gun. So now, Polly, if you're ready, you're going to talk about police.
Yeah. I read quite a long history of policing in the United States by a professor of justice studies in Kentucky, Dr. Gary Potter. And it was quite a long, extensive document. He summed up his research this way. From the beginning, American policing has been intimately tied not to the problem of crime, but to exigencies and demands of the American political economy. From the anti-immigrant bashing of early police forces to the strike breaking of the later 1800s, to the massive corruption of the early 20th century, through professionalism and now attempts at amelioration through community policing. The role of the police in the United States has been defined by economics and politics, not crime or crime control. As we look to the 21st century, it now appears that a new emphasis on science and technology, particularly related to citizen surveillance, a new wave of militarization reflected in the spread of SWAT teams and other paramilitary squads and military equipment, and a new emphasis on community pacification through community policing are all destined to replay the failures of history as the policies of the future. He talked a lot about how policing in the United States was started by the mercantile people, the business people, to protect their economic interests and kind of control society so that their businesses would not be hurt. It wasn't about protecting the people, it was about protecting business. So a recent article in the Atlantic magazine entitled "What the World Could Teach America About Policing" by Yasmin Serhan offers evidence that there is a possibility of reform. Minneapolis has determined, in the wake of George Floyd's death, to dismantle its police department. It's actually been done more than once. At the turn of the 21st century, the country of Georgia was one of the most corrupt places on earth. Bribery in the country, which lies in the Caucasus and shares a border with Russia, was rampant, and its police force, which was both a beneficiary and an enforcer of the system, was widely distrusted. So endemic was the issue that when a new government came to power in 2004, it determined that the country's police force was too corrupt to be fixed. So its leaders decided to abolish the force entirely, sacking about 30,000 officers. Then it began the 3-year process of hiring a smaller, better trained, and crucially, corruption-free police force to replace it. The new force instituted a zero-tolerance policy for officers found to be tempted by bribery. Before long, the public perception of the police changed. Nearly a decade later, Georgia's model was adapted elsewhere, this time in Camden, New Jersey. With a rising homicide rate and without the resources to hire more officers, the city decided that it too needed to start from scratch. In 2013, it took the unusual step of eliminating its police force, laying off more than 250 officers in the process. Those who were rehired as part of the new Camden County Police Department were trained to focus more on community policing, which included an emphasis on, guess what, de-escalation, and using tools such as guns and handcuffs only as a last resort. Since the disbanding, violent crime in Camden has fallen by 42%, and the murder rate has fallen by more than half. And when police in the city joined protests against Floyd's killing late last month, the police force joined them. Abolishing a police force is one challenge. Replacing it with something better is another. Key to that challenge is revamping the training for prospective officers. In Germany, for example, police recruits are required to spend 2.5 to 4 years in basic training to become an officer, with the option to pursue the equivalent of a bachelor's or master's degree in policing. Basic training in the US, by comparison, can take as little as 5 months or 8 months with field training. The less time recruits have to train, the less time is afforded for guidance or practice on crisis intervention or de-escalation. If you only have 5 months of classroom training, naturally, you're going to emphasize survival. A sociology and criminal justice professor at Rutgers told me, the author. Police training in Germany covers everything from how to respond to cases of domestic violence to how to disarm someone with a lethal weapon. In the latter case, the emphasis is not on using weapons or shooting. Rather, trainees are encouraged to de-escalate. resorting to lethal force only when absolutely necessary. This level of restraint isn't unique to Germany. It's a Europe-wide standard. In some European countries, the rules are stricter still. In Finland and Norway, for example, officers must seek permission, where possible, before shooting anyone. In Spain, they must provide verbal cautions and warning shots before resorting to deadly force. Chokeholds of the kind used to immobilize and ultimately kill Floyd are forbidden in much of Europe. And Minneapolis, California, and New York have all since banned chokeholds and other similar restraints as well. Part of the reason that police in Europe don't tend to use lethal force is because in most cases they don't have to. Compared with the US, which claims 40% of the world's firearms, gun ownership in most European countries is relatively rare. German officers carry guns, but don't generally expect to meet people who will shoot at them. Most police officers in countries such as Britain, Ireland, and Norway aren't armed at all. Even in Iceland, where citizens are allowed to have guns, the police are not generally armed. This is perhaps why police-related deaths tend to be more prevalent in the US than in many of its peer nations. Last year, the US recorded more than 1,000 killings by law enforcement, dwarfing the number of police-related deaths in Canada, Germany, England, and Wales. There is a huge difference in the level of harm that police can do in carrying out their duties in a society that has far more guns than Britain could even imagine. It creates a very different starting point. Even if the US were to adopt similar standards to that of its European counterparts, it wouldn't have the means to enforce them at the national level because the American law enforcement system is largely decentralized. The majority of the approximately 18,000 law enforcement agencies across the US are run at the city or county level, employing anywhere from 1 to 30,000 officers. The hyper-localized nature of the system means that the standards and practices these agencies employ can vary widely. American policing has no federal oversight authority. The establishment of an Inspector General of Police or some such equivalent to the British Inspectorate at the state level would solve this problem. Such an authority would operate in the way its British equivalent does, by monitoring police forces to ensure that they are abiding by a certain set of rules and regulations, and cutting the funding of those that don't. Other suggestions made to Obama's Task Force on 21st Century Policing included the establishment of a National College of Policing, modeled after the British equivalent, and a national registry of dismissed officers to ensure that those who are fired aren't simply rehired elsewhere. None of the recommendations were ultimately taken up by the Obama task force. But maybe something will change after the November election.
Thank you, Polly. I just want to tag on there with a slightly different perspective in terms of how the local police handle themselves. And that is, after September 11th, 2001, the federal government bowed to the request of the military-industrial complex and started giving taxpayer money to the manufacturers so that they could manufacture military-grade equipment for all the police forces throughout the country.
Right.
And what went along with that was the military training on how to use the military equipment. And so two things. One is the military, when you're training to use military equipment, anything that moves is an enemy because the Taliban doesn't wear uniforms. And so any person moving can be an enemy out to kill you. And so this mindset has really percolated deep into the police forces because now they see everyone they have to deal with is an enemy. And it's shoot first, ask questions later, because you just don't know if you're being ambushed or not. And so that's part of it. I just want to presence too. You hear all the time about protesters and the police were using rubber bullets and somebody got their eye put out. Oh my God, what an accident. That is no accident. Those weapons that fire the rubber coated bullets, which are marginally better than a real bullet, but still can be deadly. Those weapons come with laser sights. And so those officers who fire those weapons with the rubber coated bullets know exactly where they're aiming. And those are not accidents. And again, back to the training that says they're the enemy, you have to put them down before they can hurt you. So then one more piece, and then we're going to have conversation here and get everybody involved. And this piece is about healthcare. And again, racism, systemic racism around healthcare. So we're hearing news that COVID affects people of color at far higher rates than whites. Why might that be? We've also heard the term comorbidities. And what that means is other health issues that already exist. And often people of color and poor live in food deserts with only convenience stores or dollar type stores, Dollar Trees, Family Dollar for food. And food at those places is nearly always packaged and nutritionally vacant. Their neighborhoods are the ones sited on top of Superfund contamination, near the refineries, next to the dumps, far from the Stanford hospitals of the middle class and upper class. So speaking of hospitals, do you seriously think that a hospital on the poor side of town pays its staff the same as Stanford does? Do you think it even has the same amount of staff? And this amount of staff is something that becomes critical in a COVID environment where something new is happening. Doctors don't know what they're facing. They don't know what the best treatments are. Do you think someone working in the poor hospital has the time, the bandwidth to be able to do the research like a doctor at Stanford might be able to do if they have a lot of staff helping them with their work? Will these hospitals in the poor neighborhoods have adequate supplies for the staff and patients? Will they have enough ventilators if that's what's required? There's a reason why student loan debt for doctors can be forgiven if they work a handful of years in a poor neighborhood. But the reason is not the long-term health benefits of the community that they end up serving for those few years. They might also, people of color and poor, might also have trouble affording insurance because of their constant tickets following being targeted by police for driving while black, because of working low-paying jobs, or being out of work altogether because their nonviolent crime conviction for drugs, for instance, means they have to check the box or it causes them to lose the license or certification necessary for their trade or business. This income problem may even spill over into depression, constant stress and anxiety, or result in someone becoming homeless. And none of these are ways in which people can be supported to prevent or recover from illness. They are also far more likely to be working around toxic chemicals, pesticides, fertilizers, all of which may lead to illness or early death. Lastly, I just want to point out these issues that we've presenced, whether it was from the capitalism piece, the policing piece, or the healthcare piece, these affect the health of people of color in a systemic way. It's not the result of choices that either they make or you or I make. It is the way the system is designed to work. And so that's our task, is to first of all become aware of that, and then second of all find ways to start to change the system or build something new. And so at this point, Polly, how do you want to handle this scenario piece? Well, first of all, let's say, does anybody have any comments? I'm going to unmute everybody. And if you're still muted, you'll have to unmute yourself. Did anybody have any questions or comments on that?
The only comment I want to make is just, I'm so aware that the two organizations of the Dolores Huerta Foundation, which sits in Bakersfield, California, the most polluted area of the country. I mean, Superfund site, poverty, nothing but Fox News, Trump country. The work they're doing is so important. And the work of the Romero Institute on the California Green New Deal. I mean, I am just coming to realize, in taking on the 13 major economic sectors of California's economy, it is a radical document that will change life in our state. So I would encourage everybody to, if you can, take Danny's class, because he's going to be bringing us up to speed on that, so that after the election, which we will, you know, the Democrats will win. The goal, as he's pointed out, is from within the Democratic Party between 2020 and 2024 to have a progressive agenda move forward, so that by 2024 we actually can run the country. Anyway, it's a bold vision, but I think one worth considering. Thank you.
Adriana.
No,
Oh, I thought I saw you trying to get my attention. Okay.
no, I was scratching.
can't
So
hear
well
anybody.
presented. I just want to thank you for pulling it all together and laying such a good framework. Yeah.
So
I guess I could say something, which is that I am really appreciative of having a chance to work on these issues with us, with our group, because everything I hear, the next thing is like, oh, I didn't know about that. Oh, and it's just overwhelming, and it's hard for not to. I guess I feel stupid. Like, how did this happen? That it's all developed, and I didn't know anything about it. So
That's by design, Adriana. They
Yeah.
don't want you to know. That's
yeah,
why there's all this other distraction, Dancing with the Stars and football and all this other stuff, is to keep you from paying attention and seeing what's
yeah. So this is a gift, really.
Yeah.
Carol,
Yeah, I just want to say it's such an important time. I mean, astrologically and everything that's been buried is up to be seen. And we are here. We incarnated on purpose at this time. And this gathering is not by accident. And us looking at it with our hearts open is not by accident. And so it may be new, parts of it may not be at all new, but, you know, to come together with the willingness to step forward and to release whatever old patterns may have come into us by the system without even knowing it.
Yeah.
Be willing to look at it and do a reset is what we're here to do. And as we do it, every step we take, every decision we make, and every way that we show up for others in that consciousness makes a difference.
yeah, thank you. Thank you. So we have a few scenarios that we came up with for people to put themselves into and see how they feel. We were going to break into smaller groups. We have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 people. We could break into two groups of 6 people each, or we could stay in one big group. I have a vote next to me for breaking into 2 groups.
We don't know what we're going to be doing, so it's hard to know how big we ought to have the groups.
Yeah, well, it'll be 6 people each.
Let's do it.
So, okay. So Derek, you'll take one, I'll take the other. Do you want to just divvy us up?
You're on mute, Derek.
Let's describe what we're going to do first.
Okay. So I have a list of a bunch of scenarios, and Derek, you have a copy of the same list?
I do.
Okay.
I'm also going to put it into chat.
Okay. That's probably a good idea.
Derek always has good ideas.
So then you can break us up into 2 groups.
And what are we doing and how much time do we have?
You give us the.
We're gonna, Derek and I are gonna give you each a scenario to think about. And have you process it mentally and emotionally, and then talk about it. And I'd like each person to step into one of these scenarios.
How many are there, Polly?
Let's see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 5 scenarios, but there's flexibility in them, in that you could do most of them either as a Black person or as a white person.
Mm.
And that's what I want you to think about.
Okay,
So I will, in my group, I will assign a scenario. I will pick people arbitrarily and assign you a scenario. And then you'll have a minute or so to think about it, and then talk about it, how you feel about it. Does that sound reasonable?
So are we ourselves, or the first one is you're the mother of a teenage son, so I could just be an arbitrary mother. Doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
If I pretend if I'm myself, or
yeah,
I can make it whatever I want.
Right.
okay.
So
Break this up.
Derek's doing that. Okay. So the 2 of us are going to join room 1.
Hello.
No.
All righty.
Okay. It's about scenarios.
Okay. So Jody,
Yes. I'm off. I'm offline over there. Muted.
you're the mother of a teenage son who wants to go out for the evening with a group of friends. You are white and your son is white. How do you feel about this as you watch him leave the house and until he returns home?
I'm probably scared shitless because I don't think it's a good idea. I know it's going to happen, so I have to put up with trusting what will happen. As a white person, I'm going to have to trust. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah, essentially.
So you have decided that you're going to be a white mother in this scenario.
I told her.
She just told me I'm a white mother.
I'm sorry, I missed that. Sorry.
Sorry, I can't be a Black mother and a white mother at the same time, but
No.
Well, I got confused. I get confused easily these days.
So
Okay.
Adriana, you're a Black mother of a teenage son.
Who's going out for the evening with his friends.
Right.
And I have a sinking feeling in my stomach because I know that he wants to go out with his friends, and our neighborhood is dangerous, and there's shootings, and so it's so arbitrary. So I'm very, very nervous whenever he goes out, especially at night.
Okay. So,
Is that,
what?
was there something else?
No,
Okay.
I just want us to explore these things together.
Okay.
Mary, you're a woman of color, dressed in a dress or skirt, but wearing tights underneath for modesty. You walk into a clothing store and a young clerk glares at you and then accuses you of stealing the dress you are wearing, that you wore into the store. This actually happened to a friend of ours. How do you respond? Yeah.
I think I'd be afraid, and I'd be saying, "I'm sorry, but this is the dress I walked in on. Can't you? Isn't there a camera that shows that I walked in with this dress on?" I think it would be, yeah, very, very, like, just very scary. Like, how am I supposed to prove that this is my dress?
Well, this person actually to ask the clerk and his manager, when the manager came over, to go check the rack. Are there any dresses like this on the rack?
Mm.
And then someone, one of them, they persisted with this, and she finally took the dress off, and all she had on the top underneath, which was a bra, and a rather revealing bra. But she took it all off. She took her dress off in the store to prove to them there's no way she would have walked into a store and like that in order to steal a dress. So
Is it harassment? I mean, like, the motivation for the person to say that to begin with is just to get her not to come back?
Well,
no,
in this situation, she is Aboriginal.
this was in Australia.
This was in
She's an
Australia.
Aboriginal, but it was just, this clerk was just being
Stupid.
he thought because she had tights that were showing underneath the skirt of her dress that she had put the dress on over
Over the tights.
over her outfit to walk out in it.
Okay, let's go
So,
to the next one.
Anyway,
Yeah.
but would that have ever happened to a white person? No. Okay.
Would be humiliating, aside from
Yeah,
embarrassing, humiliating.
right.
Just,
So, Alain, you are walking down the street in downtown Santa Cruz, and you see a policeman hassling a brown or a black man on the street. Do you quickly walk away? Do you stay within view and earshot and turn on the video camera in your phone to record the situation? Do you walk up to the pair and pretend you're an acquaintance of the man to provide some emotional support? Do you try to gather an audience of witnesses to form a circle around the two? Do you do something else? Is there something else you could do?
My tendency would be to go and pretend I know this person,
Right.
and support him, and ask him what's happening.
Yeah.
That would be my tendency.
You're unusual.
And it would take me too much time to find out how to turn on my camera. But I can walk over and say, hey, what's happening?
Yeah.
That's actually a technique that is recommended for people who are learning, getting the training to intervene when there's, I think it's Surge, the group is Surge.
Oh, right.
Okay.
Uh-huh. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, when I first thought about this, my inclination is always to walk the other way. You know, I mean, I'm a woman, I'm not very strong. I'm not good on my feet with interaction. And, but I have realized I can't just walk away anymore.
Yeah,
It's
great.
I would actually use my my handicap, my infirmity to make a point. I would hop over, limping to whatever, and use that as a protection from police violence.
Oh. Right.
Yeah.
Good.
You gotta use what you can,
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and we also need to be realistic about,
Right.
5 years old, wanting to help could be legitimately dangerous.
So, Cecily.
Yes.
You're out on a quick errand. You're driving on a state road like Highway 9 in a car on which one of the taillights is out, and a CHP officer pulls you over. He asks you for license and registration and to step out of the car. You realize that you left your wallet at home.
Uh-oh.
What do you do? And how do you feel in this situation? And then what do you do?
Well, I feel very nervous, and then I've not got the documents that he wants. Just a sec, I'll pop back and get it. Wait here, I won't be long. I don't know. I mean, well,
Yeah,
that's actually happened. I mean, anyway.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. And if I was black, it would be a totally different situation.
Yeah, if you were yeah, so what do you think about if you were black?
Well, I don't know. Maybe I'd be arrested. I've no idea. I don't know. I don't know. Has anyone ever had that situation happen?
I've been pulled over by police. I don't know if I always have my wallet or my ID on me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm, of course, reading into the CHP is not going to be on Highway 9.
But
But CHP, they do interrupt whatever you're doing, is pretty serious. I mean, it seems like, okay, get your ducks in order because here comes the feds or something.
Yeah.
But Highway 9, that seems like you could probably talk yourself out of it unless you were black. I'm not sure.
Right.
yeah, I don't
Okay.
know. Okay, Alex. You're in your 70s and have some physical issues that make it hard to maintain the large house and lot where you currently live.
No comment.
You start looking for a smaller property closer to amenities. You find a lovely place, well maintained and fairly priced, that you really like in a racially mixed neighborhood. Okay, you're white and your realtor, assuming that property values in this area will go down because it's racially mixed, advises you to look elsewhere or to make an offer well below the asking price. How do you feel about that and what do you decide to do?
Yeah, I mean, that's really exactly the sort of thing we're talking about. That's really sad. And I mean, I don't know that I'd want to make an offer under the market. That seems out of sorts. I mean, I feel guilty moving into that and afraid I'm gentrifying the place, really. And that's the sort of thing that seems to go on. The white people move in and then the prices go up and start running everybody else off.
Yeah, and this is, okay, so you're black or brown.
Yeah.
And your realtor suggests that you'll find it hard to get a mortgage and you should probably look elsewhere.
Yeah.
So the question is, in the way our system works, it's usually the neighborhoods don't tend to stay multiracial for very long. They either go all white or they go all colored. And
it's exactly what you're saying, that if the neighborhood starts to stop being white, the property values go down. That's what we expect to happen. And so we don't want to go in those neighborhoods because we know we're going to lose our property value, and we're told that it's an investment and it's going to maintain us, and we got to make sure the property value goes up. This sort of American dream fantasy that we all have about property always going up. Just
Can you give
right. What I'm trying to figure out, I chose this because I'm trying to figure out how we would change the system. In that, what would you do to help change the system so that you could keep it a vibrant, multiracial community?
Yeah, I mean, certainly as a white person moving into a neighborhood like that, I'd want to engage with the neighbors and become part of the community so that we start noticing that the neighborhood's starting to gentrify. We can start pushing back against it and organize and keep people in the neighborhood that have been there before.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Do you have something for Lynn? Hi, Lynn.
Hi, Len.
Hello, everyone.
Hi there. So would would a positive interaction be to this scenario that I go in there and I'm going in there to buy a house at a real reasonable price, and I won't try to bargain them down.
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
That was my sense of it, that you know, if you really want that house and you want to be in a mixed neighborhood, then you offer a fair price.
So you're not going in there because you think you're going to get a bargain.
Right.
Right.
Going in there.
But I
to
think
be
you could also say with a real estate agent, like, why would you say this to if I wasn't white, would you be saying this? I mean, to really, like, that's racist just to say, you
Right.
know.
And that's, yeah, that's the other thing that that I would want to do is really take it up with a realtor and say this is not right.
Just,
Never time for a new realtor at that point.
You know.
you have one from them?
Well, we have
Oh, no, he's just L.
Oh, what the hell?
he keeps going back and forth.
Here is, here is.
Do.
So
He
we
needs to be included in the group and told what we're doing.
right we've
Role
been
playing.
talking about we've been going through scenarios to try to experience the difference in the way people of color are treated versus the way white people are treated in various situations. So,
Given the same scenario for house.
okay, so this is the scenario that we were just talking about.
Maybe we can ask Len some
He's getting it.
actual example of the interviews he led on his radio show. Some actual example of what he heard.
That's great. No, that's a good idea.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the ones, of course, that is super, super common is just the thing of walking into a store if you're black and being followed around, you know, just being automatically suspected of, oh, this person's going to be shoplifting or they're going to do this or that or whatever.
Well, you missed, I don't think you heard the scenario that I gave earlier of a woman of color walking into, dressed in a dress, but wearing tights underneath for modesty, and walking into a store and being accused by the clerk of stealing the dress because he saw that she had tights on and he thought she just wore her street clothes in and put a dress off the rack onto her body. And she finally had to take the dress off and show them that all she was wearing underneath was a bra in order to convince them that she wore the dress into the store.
Wow. Yeah.
That is very extreme.
You ask him for other examples.
Cecily, would you like to run the?
No, I don't.
the
I'm
thing?
sorry. I'm just.
Why don't you talk to the group instead of talking to me?
Alan had just said that Len might have some other examples from the radio show, and there were a number of examples. I can't recall any specifically, but Len, was there any more that you might share?
Well, before I do that, let me understand, because it sounded like you were trying to problem solve. Like, how would you intervene in a situation like this, or?
Well, we had it was just a way, I had scenarios, and it was a way for people to look at the difference in the way that you would be treated if you were Black in a certain situation versus the way you're treated as a white person. But
So, I mean, if you're thinking of examples of that, the obvious ones we all know are when you're driving. You're far more likely to be stopped for a petty violation. You know, say there's a light out on your license plate, or a tail light isn't working, or whatever. You're much more likely to be stopped as a suspect if there's a notice that there's a suspect, you know, that might be in the neighborhood or something. And that one of the people who told this story, this young man in his 20s, Charlie Ritchie, was walking from his house he lives very close to 41st Avenue. He was walking from his house to the bank on 41st Avenue, and an officer made a U-turn when he saw him walking down the street in order to, you know, have him stop and show his ID and all that, because he, quote, met the description of a suspect they were looking for. But when Tyree got to see the photograph, you know, looking over the officer's shoulder, basically, the photograph was of a significantly shorter Hispanic man with facial hair, none of which fit his description physically. But the officer made a big deal out of comparing the picture and, you know, so make it look really legit. And he was challenging him and saying, "You're profiling me," you know. It's like, just because I'm black, I live right over here, you know, and, you know, it's like, anyway. But, you know, in some circumstances, that would be something you know, you could be at risk, you know, it could be a risk for your life if it's not handled very carefully.
Yeah.
And in fact, two of the other people who were on the call, Joy Flynn was one of them. And I think Jinx also mentioned, when they first lived in this area, they just would not drive alone through places like Capitola or Scotts Valley, because it was a setup. You know, if you're a black person driving a car by yourself, you're going to get pulled over. It's just going to happen. And Joy said that's still the case, that she won't drive alone in Capitola or Scotts Valley for that reason. So, you know, that's something we don't even give a second thought to.
And
Exactly.
how
That's
does
the part that we're looking for.
how does driving with someone else help?
Well, I think it's twofold. Even if it's another person who's black, if it's a, you know, you might look like you have a social purpose. So yeah, I mean, I think she meant if she's driving with a white person.
Oh, okay, yeah. Wow, it's crazy.
My friend's last name is Garza. And oftentimes when she's on the phone, like talking to customer service, they'll say, "Mrs. Garcia." Like they'll change her name. And her ex-husband was Mexican. But like they purposely change her name, like to make her sound more ethnic. And this happens to her. It's like an intimidation thing. And it's like, why would you change somebody's name? You know, like it's just amazing, like how she talks about that. And it's just, you know, they'll get frustrated with her or whatever, and then start their name.
Well,
yeah, to me, one of the questions is why is there such a need to be able to divide people up, you know, to be able to say, oh, these are the bad guys over here and these are the good guys over there. Like, why is there a need to do that instead of approaching each individual and actually assessing the situation? I mean, there are certainly places and spaces where you might run into somebody who happens to be armed and you know, makes their living through, you know, whatever, some form of crime or another, and that person might be black, you know, or they might be white, or they might be Hispanic, but you know, you don't know that until you're in the situation. And so, you know, what I'm like really curious about this thing, like, even people who've been raised with nominally not taught that these people are inferior or these people are not as good as you, but somehow it's become part of their identity. And like, what is that? You know, how do we break that down? Why is there a need to be able to define the other as someone, you know, who's not like me or not deserving of the same respect or opportunity that I have?
Well, I know for me, having grown up in the South, I was very carefully educated to address other adults as Mr. or Mrs. when I was a kid, as a sign of respect. But I later came to find out that that was also a mark of being white, that until the 60s, Black people were called by their first name, or boy or something else, you know, uncle. They didn't deserve last name. And so calling somebody Mr. or Mrs. was a way of asserting that they are white and they have social status. And to say that they're not is insulting, and you're implying that they're less and further down the social ladders. I think certainly where I grew up, and there's still some casual racism there, don't get off on that, but it's this idea that, you know, if you're comparing me to those people, you're saying I'm like those people, and you're taking me down a notch, and I, you know, don't want to. That's unpleasant, and I don't want to participate in that, and I'll fight back.
Yeah, your question, Len, reminded me of a James Baldwin book, I'm Not Your Negro. Where he asks a question: why is it that we need to have a Negro? Why is it?
It's
Well, that
a question of power and economic superiority.
Just a need to be above someone.
Right. Yep.
well, we're looking at the components of systemic racism
Right.
and the indicators of systemic race, and that's how we got here, and now we're wanting to unwind it, take it away.
It's been the whole economic superiority business has been in place since the founding of this country. And we've, you know, our ancestors were taught it, and they taught it to us. It's
5 more minutes.
yeah, it's frightening to me. Deb Thomas Smith found a long time ago, she found a book in an antique store in Bakersfield called Coco. And it was a children's story about a little Black boy, and it was horrendous. I mean, it was outrageously denigrating to Black people. And she showed it to me, and it turned my stomach. It was so
Racist.
yeah. And then I thought there was a children's book that I knew called Little Black Sambo.
I have that.
I don't remember it, but it's, you know, I don't remember much about it, but I'm sure it was very close to, maybe not as nasty as Coco, but it's just been in our culture from the very beginning. And when I was reading the stuff about the police and the fact that the police were they started, businesses often started with their own private enforcers. And then they found that it would certainly be would be easier for them if the government took over the hiring and the paying of police
Security.
It's
yeah,
kind of
security.
in Chicago. I lived in a neighborhood with a lot of really fancy houses, and I was in the neighborhood for their picnic every year, and I'm still in that group. And a few years after I left, they started banding together to hire their own police, not it's like
Security.
private police to drive around their neighborhood for safety
Patrol.
yeah. And it wasn't like, and in Milwaukee there was always neighborhood watch, where it was all the neighbors would go out together and neighborhood watch together for the safety of the community. But this is totally different. This is the haves protecting their own little corner, because the police department's so dysfunctional in Chicago that they have, they're like, okay, well then we'll just hire our own police, basically. And they have to cooperate with the real police. But it's just the fact that they can't even afford to do that. And like when the protests were going on a few weeks ago, they were like, okay, we're gonna have to beef it up. If you have any more money that you can donate so we can have more patrol. Like, it's not going away.
And I think it goes back to the class distinction. I mean, particularly in like in British culture, which had such an influence on the U.S. formation here, where prior to the mid 1600s, there wasn't specifically a racial distinction. That was kind of it was actually a very deliberate invention. There was actually legislation in the House of Lords in 1650 something to create this distinction that said you can't call these people from that you're taken out of the jails or whatever, from out of the prisons in England and taken to the colonies, you can't call them the same thing that you call these blacks that the slave trade is bringing from Africa. You've got to set up separate terms, because we're finding those people are uniting too much and fighting against us in united rebellions in the colonies. We can't have that anymore. And the class distinction was by clothing so often. And in those days, we didn't have factory-made clothing. I mean, you had cloth, but everything, tailoring was all by hand. And so, if a man had really good clothes, he was rich. And if he didn't have really good clothes, it was because he was poor. And that was, it's like a very striking thing. It's like, oh, you've got lace on your collar, you must be a lord, or you must be a wealthy merchant. But if if you're wearing homespun, you're just a sailor or a farmer or whatever, and can be kicked around. And that class attitude is still with us as well. And I think the black-white thing kind of comes out of it in a big way. Because until really just maybe 400 or 500 years ago, it was not unusual for there to be among the wealthy European whites, there were wealthy European blacks, because there was people going back and forth. I mean, I don't know if you know the story of Parzival, the legend of Parzival, which was written in the early 1200s. Parzival's father, who's a knight, a noble knight, goes to serve the Queen of Senegal, and ultimately they have a love affair, and he has a son. And Parzival never knows about this missing brother until the end of the book. And when he discovers his missing brother, it's like, welcome, brother. It's like this huge, exciting thing. It doesn't matter that the guy is black. It just doesn't matter. So, it's like that view of the world, the 1200s, they knew there were black people, and it just wasn't the same issue that it became when it was intertwined with the class issue. And that to me is kind of telling that, you know, we created this monster by the slave trade and this notion of color as race.
Yep.
Yeah, in 1200s there weren't black people. That was a later invention. Yeah.
There weren't white people. I mean, white people was an invention. You know, you were English, or you were Irish, or you're Welsh, or you're Scottish, or you're French.
Protestant, there's plenty of other distinctions to get crossed with, but not that one. And yeah, the dynamic of the poor white people and the poor black people being pitted against each other still goes on in the South. That's a large part of why that's maintained, is so the people in power can stay in power by, you know, telling the poor white people, at least you're not black.
Polarization, I think, is that function of keeping people separate.
Yeah, and here.
What's that?
This is a history book by a black historian, and it's called Before Color Prejudice. And he looks at attitudes towards black people in the classic era, you know, among the Egyptians, and then the Greeks, and then the Romans. And it's fascinating because, like I said, they didn't think of black as an inferior thing at all. In fact, they were often quite jealous of, you know, some of the amazing, you know, things that had happened in the Nile Valley. You know, they talk about the Nubian kings and all that stuff. You know, so it's not, it hasn't been consistently that way. I mean, here's another odd little tidbit of history is when the slave trade was happening and they're bringing all these people, you know, what happened was one tribe would cooperate with the slave traders. And so they would bring in, you know, they, you know, basically capture enemy tribes, bring people in, and they would sell them off to the slave traders, who then would imprison them until a ship came and sell them off. You know, there's this whole chain of middlemen. And it got progressively worse treatment as it went down the line. But the slaves, a lot of the people from West Africa, you know, that culture had a really highly developed metallurgical craft. We're ending. But anyway, if it turned out that a slave that was brought to the New World happened to be a smith, then their value on the market, in the slave market, was very high, because it was known that the smiths from West Africa were better than most of the smiths from the British Isles.
Cool. Who knew?
So we've got to leave the room.
Okay, we'll go back to the meeting room.
Are we in the main room? No, we're not.
Yes, we are.
Yes, we are.
There we go.
All right, we're about to join you, the other half here.
There we go. Here we are.
Very cool.
Thank you, Derek.
Oh, well, you're welcome. That went on a little longer than we had planned, but I was looking at the clock. I think we're still good, so we got an early start. I don't know about the other breakout room, but the one I was in was really rich. So I hope you had a good experience in yours as well. Anybody have any comments, any takeaways from that? Not that we're going to spend a lot of time debriefing off of that particular breakout room, but anybody have any comments that feel they need to be said? Michelle.
So one thing that emerged, you know, we were having the conversation around that not knowing, and not that there's just so much that's been so opaque, that if you grow up in white privilege, you don't have to know, and so you don't. And there's not really an easy way to get that. And I just had this vision of, similar to our farm worker reality tour, what if part of education always included, you need to go spend some time in neighborhoods that you're never going to live in. You need to go spend some time with families that otherwise you might never encounter. And really have time to not only experience it, but then talk about it and process it and recognize those differences.
I did a program, yeah. I did a program called the Like and Different Peace Camp in Milwaukee when I was in my 30s, so about 20 years ago. And we had kids from all over the city, and we'd meet in different parts of the city year after year. And, so I have a lot of experience with that, if anybody's interested.
Anybody else?
I would recommend how do you call that? A movement break, because we've been sitting in our chairs for quite a while.
Sure.
Stand up, move a little bit, do something.
Change the energy a little bit. Everybody get up and
I'm gonna
shake it out a little bit. And
you can go to this one. Oh, it's not.
I'd also like to recommend the book that Len just brought forward for our group, for the entire group, if he still is here and got it, to show the cover. I'm just going to stretch now. So
he's up moving around. So when he gets back, we'll ask him. Len, can you show the cover of the book that you were recommending?
In fact, let me turn the light on. A book by Frank Snowden Jr. And it looks at relationship between white and black cultures in ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, and ancient Rome, looking at the historic record, just to see how people were perceived.
And what's the general conclusion there?
Well, I don't know how much time you want to spend, but there's actually a lovely little statement, right? Wait, I thought I had it marked. Where did it go? Yeah, here we go. Where he says, the book has called attention. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we're fine.
The book has called attention to some important areas in which white-black relationships in antiquity differed from the racial patterns in a number of later societies. The differences are striking. In the ancient world, there were prolonged black-white contacts from an early date. First encounters with blacks frequently involved soldiers or mercenaries, not slaves or so-called savages. Initial favorable impressions of blacks were explained and amplified generation after generation by poets, historians, and philosophers. The Central Societies developed a positive image of peripheral Nubia as an independent state of considerable military, political, and cultural importance. Both blacks and whites were slaves, but blacks and slaves were never synonymous. Black emigres were not excluded from opportunities available to others of alien extraction, nor were they handicapped in fundamental social relations. They were physically and culturally assimilated in science, philosophy, and religion. Color was not the basis of a widely accepted theory concerning the inferiority of blacks. Reports of imaginary creatures or uncivilized tribes inhabiting the extreme south, the somatic norm image of Mediterranean white, and standard black-white symbolism, all contained the potentiality for the vastly different roles that these factors obviously played in later development of anti-black sentiment. But the Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, and early Christians were free of what Keith Irvine has described as the curse of acute color consciousness.
Right.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Does this book talk about, Len, does it talk anything about the fact that slaves actually come from the Slavic people being the first one to be enslaved? Is that?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. The historic root of the word slave and Slav are related. And slavery, if you probably know and assume, slavery has been practiced for a very, very, very long time. But like so many other things, the sort of the mercantile system and technology enabled the black slave trade to be way extreme form of slavery compared to all previous manifestations that I've read about anyway. I mean, I haven't read everything, but obviously, you know, the level of both social and emotional and physical cruelty, you know, the combination of those, the separating people from their people, separating them from their families, separating them from their culture, assaulting their culture, demeaning their culture, and then also physically punishing them for not, you know, doing whatever. I mean, that combination of circumstances, I think, was probably more or less unprecedented, because you know, there's definitely lots of old stories of people having slaves, but it wasn't the same. And there's lots of stories of slaves in the early South escaping from the settlements along the rivers and coastlines to go live with the Indians. And oftentimes they were enslaved by the Indian tribes. I mean, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Creek, the Seminole, they all held slaves in the South. They were very successful slave owners, but they were much more preferred because they typically would integrate people into the tribe, and their status as slaves would end once they felt they were integrated into the tribe. So, you know, that's a really different way of looking at it. It was the Native American way in that region to look at it that way, which I think corresponds to the slavery, you know, and like, well, we know that the Inca took slaves, and we know that they were really cruel about it, but they also know that they took whole villages as slaves, and those people stayed together as a group. And we know that the Aztec did the same.
Well,
and you know, if you read the story of Ibn Battuta, who traveled from Tangier all the way to China in the 1300s, while he was in the marketplace in Turkey, he picked up a couple Greek girl slaves. And, you know, he ends up falling in love with them, one of them, and is absolutely brokenhearted when she gets sick and dies later. So, you know, it's slavery and, yeah.
I'm thinking, right. So, but doesn't, Len, looking at just the invasions, right? So invasions that came, Western civilization that came from the Northeast to the South, it would be about going into communities, you know, wiping out the whole community, keeping some of the young virgins for the soldiers as booty, right? So I always think of slavery as kind of an outcome of all the continuous invasions that happened. And my curiosity as to why did those invasions even occur was kind of blew my mind when I was reading, you know, it was about when societies became too big to have enough resources to take care of all the people, that's what would then force them to go outside and steal the resources from some other group, right? And the reason that freaked me out was, well, my God, that's what we do today, right? We don't have enough oil, or at least we didn't. Now we're trying to be self-sufficient. So we would go outside to the Middle East to take their oil because we need your oil because it's ours and we're better than you because we have this white skin and you don't, right? So I feel like slavery is an outcome of the invasions that have occurred, and that when we say they kept a whole community as slaves, that is kind of how it's gone for maybe anywhere from 5,500 years to Crete was one of the last countries or areas that didn't have and show any violence up until about 1200 BC, right? But then all communities would be wiped out. And the other thing that I thought was very important is you can't keep people at that level of violence towards another community after they've assimilated somewhat. So if you, like you said, this man fell in love with, you know, this young woman that he purchased somewhere, that is how it happened, right? And then society would calm down a little bit, but then there'd be another wave of invasions. So if this was the natural or this is what happened, there should be at some point an awakening that, okay, we've done this for a long, long period of time, but we see that it's inhumane and doesn't make sense and doesn't need to be this way. And I always think, well, that's really cool, because that's where we're at, hopefully now, everyone coming to this awakening, but that race, class, gender, able-bodyism have existed. It's just particularly mean in the United States, how we've treated Black people. What I always think too, sorry, I know I'm talking a bit, but how we treat Black people is very different than how we treat Native people. The indigenous folks in the United States have been seen as invisible, whereas we kind of been made invisible, whereas Black folk, wherever they show up, they're in trouble, right? Indigenous people just kept to a reservation, more so, you know, forced, or that's where they found their safety. But, you know, we're not there anymore. The United States has nowhere else to grow. There is no further lands to go conquer. And so now we have to be faced with what we've created.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's interesting, the difference in the way that we treat the Black people versus indigenous people.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were, the policy with the Indians was to assimilate them, to retrain them,
To civilize them.
to civilize them, take them away from their language and their culture,
Their way of seeing the world. They were dangerous.
Right.
We had to make them go away because their point of view was dangerous.
right?
Well, we needed to take their land though, so we had to find a reason to do that, right?
But I'm thinking
yeah,
in
and
terms
I
of
don't
difference
wanna-
between culture, the Black culture and the Native culture is a point of view, and
But it is also that the Native people that were already here, we wanted their land.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It wasn't about land with the Black people because they didn't have any.
No, we just wanted their labor.
Yeah,
Cheap.
right.
Mhm.
And when we use the word we, I know there's a lot of confusion between people generally think we, the country, but the true history of our country is that the Northern Industrial Alliance is what the Europeans called themselves when they colonized every continent. And they were white skinned, they were wealthy, they were male, and in their cosmology and their religion, they were born to rule the world, and they had the right to all the resources. So that's the history of the colonization here. But I don't think it's widely known. At least I found out like 7 years ago in a Danny workshop that the defining statement, the mission statement of the CIA has never been about protecting the country. It is word for word the mission statement of the Northern Industrial Alliance: to secure the natural resources to which we are entitled.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you think of both militarizing the us, the people, and all the subsets of us, and militarizing the world, it has been from the beginning the economic imperative of this capitalism that has captured a nation to do its bidding. So the police basically are there to protect the corporate power structure. And the nation is now there to protect the corporate power structure because of how they've, bought off most politicians. So it's just really interesting when we say we, and what we think of as we and who we're speaking about as we. And I think we need to be fluent enough to talk about various we's and to make that clear when we're speaking.
Yeah, because again, back to the class thing, there's always been resistance to this model of domination, and probably a lot of our ancestors were part of that, you know, because in fact, the people who were resisting the domination model were in the majority 90% of the time. And, you know, when you start reading about all the rebellions and revolts that were put down by the establishment over the centuries on, you know, in this continent and, you know, in the Caribbean and other colonies, it's like, ouch, you know, there's a lot of oppression, and always backed up with weapons of war. And just, I just wanted to say, because I feel like it needs to be clear for us that assimilation for Native peoples was never really protection. And a case in point is right after the Civil War, all these assimilated Indians of the Atlantic seaboard and the Northeast who owned property, had in most cases lost their languages, in many cases had intermarried, were uprooted by force, their property taken, and they were forced to go to the Oklahoma territories, where amazingly, even after all the losses they suffered through in being forced to go to the Oklahoma territories themselves and being used as essentially manipulated into fighting in the Civil War, the Native people in Oklahoma welcomed them. But those people, as I said, in most cases had lost their original languages. They weren't Indian in any respect except for a portion of their genetic material.
Trail of Tears.
Yeah, and this is already, you know, 40 years past the original Trail of Tears.
Yep.
So I'm ready to take us into a different space, and keep in mind I'm trying to provoke a little bit. So,
Derek, can I ask what is? I don't even know when we're scheduled to end this session.
We were targeting 8:30.
Okay, thank you.
And if that's a problem, feel free. You know, I mean, do what you have to do, take care of yourself, and leave when you need to. But we were targeting 8:30. So it's time for a grown-up conversation about our collective needs as human beings and how these can be met effectively. Republicans racialize the poverty of resources, the poverty of spirit, the poverty of justice. Democrats run from any real change to the system that might alleviate the poverty. Is that because they're in service to their corporate masters? Neither one of the two parties is interested in going to meet people where they are. And we have lost sight of what constitutes real wealth because of our focus on a fiat marker that conveys power over others. Real wealth, again, is healthy relationships, healthy community, and healthy nature. The true healing after any tragedy is not currency, it's someone being willing to help out. Now I am putting into chat, hopefully I'm putting into chat, the name Risma Menicum, and I listened to an On Being podcast where he was being interviewed. And I want to summarize one piece of what he said because I think this is really pertinent to what we're talking about tonight. He says, we intellectualize white supremacy and then we can quickly dismiss it. Oh, it's not me. But if we presence instead of white supremacy, if we presence white body supremacy, that's a term that people of color resonate with. They've been told since forever that they are defective. This lands in the body even of white people and can't be dismissed. White body supremacy. It is this scar that has to be dealt with, not an intellectual concept if we are to overcome systemic racism. White comfort always trumps black liberation. When white people get nervous, people lose their jobs. When white people get nervous, people get hung from trees. When white people get nervous, babies get put in cages.
No.
So a racist can be defined as someone who advocates policies that have a disparate impact on the poor and people of color, who treats human beings as property or subhuman. If you scratch a racist, you'll find a thief who will steal healthcare, living wages, community well-being, and who will give 84% of the COVID relief money to corporations with no guarantees of wages being the result. Why was the payroll protection program, which was only a tiny fraction of the government assistance to business, so widely spoken about in the media? It's logical to say that the federal response to COVID is institutionalized looting. Even the Catholic Church has received $1.4 billion in government assistance because of the COVID programs. Why was testing so limited? It was limited in the beginning because Big Pharma didn't have their own tests to sell to the market. It took time for them to craft and manufacture their own tests and then reap the profits from them. And a vaccine is a myth, meant both to underscore the danger, oh my goodness, we can't go back to normal until we have a vaccine, but also to justify billions in public funds being spent on research and development. And interestingly enough, there are several proposed vaccines at the moment. One of them, by one of the companies, the National Institute of Health, Dr. Fauci, the National Institute of Health has a 50% interest in one of the proposed vaccines. If they get that vaccine to market and start making profit, the National Institute of Health gets half of the profit. Okay, that should bother us all. Pandemics expose the fissures in society. America has many, but I'm going to point to two right here: racism and poverty, and a poverty both of income and of wealth. Slavery was employment, just not the kind that rewards the worker with money or wealth. And there were indentured whites too, more at the start, but still today. Can you argue that debt does not a slave make? We need to fundamentally stop treating people like things and corporations like people. We need to stop spending 54 cents of every dollar of discretionary spending on war and death and spend less than 15% on life-abetting safety nets. In a time like this, when people are dying from a broken healthcare system, dying from a broken economic system, dying from a broken justice system, who will step up and fight for a better, longer life for all? Now, here's a particular quote. Again, comes from a person of color. And the quote is, "If you haven't been a victim, you cannot fully understand being a victim. If you haven't experienced the pervasiveness and constancy of negative bias, both coming from other groups and even influencing your own view of yourself, then you will never completely comprehend. So in one respect, a white person cannot truly say, I get it. Neither can you ever do enough to win a gold star and say you've done enough as long as racism exists. We think in terms of individual and active, taunting, beating, lynching, ignoring. We don't see the embedded nature of our ways. Silence and denial solves nothing. We are not whole. We cannot thrive when some of us are beaten, marginalized, or killed. I also want to mention that there are myriad ways the system oppresses and exploits people, especially people of color. Until the mid-60s, the FHA and VA loans were race restricted. Some property deeds contained a clause restricting occupancy to, quote, the Caucasian race or their live-in servants. People of color were not allowed to even be in the buildings. In Ferguson, a suburb of St. Louis, the city government financed itself in large part by citing and fining its residents. There were more citations issued each year than there were residents. Those unable to pay the fines were often sent to jail, disturbing their ability to earn money to eventually be able to pay the fine, of course. Thus, even local government is seen to be systemically racist. We could talk about inheritance, how it took decades, generations before Black people were able to even have property they could pass on to their kids, while the white people have been gathering property all along. We could talk about redlining. I could talk about in Thailand, there are frequent ads, TV, radio, and billboards for skin lightening products, literally selling body whiteness. You may recognize the name of Breonna Taylor. You may also understand the term gentrification. It is likely a surprise to you, though, to discover that these two appear to be linked. Now, I'm going to quote from the Courier Journal, which is the Louisville, Kentucky paper, the newspaper. Here's a quote that ran early this past week. Lawyers for the family of Breonna Taylor, just to be clear, she was the 26-year-old EMT that was shot by police, a SWAT team that broke into her apartment. Lawyers for the family of Breonna Taylor say the shooting death of the 26-year-old was a result of a Louisville, Kentucky Police Department's, quote, operation to clear out a block in western Louisville that was part of a major gentrification makeover, end quote. The family's lawyers filed documents in Jefferson Circuit Court on Sunday, July 5th, accusing a police squad called Place-Based Investigations of deliberately misleading narcotics detectives to, quote, target a home on Elliott Avenue, leading them to believe they were after some of the city's largest violent crime and drug rings, end quote. The complaint, which amends an earlier lawsuit filed by Taylor's mother against the 3 Louisville officers who fired their weapons into Taylor's home, claims Taylor was caught up in a case that was less about drug house on Elliott Avenue and more about speeding up the city's multi-million-dollar redevelopment plan. Okay, she was fighting back against the gentrification redevelopment, and they took her out. Okay,
how was she?
Systemic racism.
I have heard that, Derek. How was she fighting against the gentrification, though? Was she taking an active role? Was she an outspoken
She was an outspoken advocate against the redevelopment plan, which was going to demolish a lot of the buildings and come in and rebuild new buildings that could be sold for much bigger profit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. She was fighting the redevelopment, and they killed her. Okay? Had nothing to do, I mean, in that regard, it had little to do with race other than they wanted all the black people out of the neighborhood. I mean, that's the racist point. That's where that comes in. And so now we invite you to dig deep into the topics, the emotions that we have raised here this evening. Help me understand the ramifications of the existing system and sketch a vision of the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible, one which transcends these issues and works for all life on earth. So I've got a couple more questions here. Question number 1, there is a spectrum with fight and reform the system on one end and remove the system and build a different one on the other. Where are you on this spectrum? What places you there? Where do you want to be and what will it take to get there? And question number 2, how might you increase your awareness of these systemic injustices, not just intellectually, but emotionally and physically also? What core beliefs stand in your way? And so if there are questions, we'll take those. Otherwise, let's go back into our same breakout rooms as before. Questions? Okay. Let's give this one maybe 30 minutes and then we'll come back and close up.
Okay, so we leave the first one. Did he write the question up there?
2 questions.
Okay.
I know they're hard to see, but
Yeah. With my glasses.
okay. Does everybody have their chat open and can read the question, or do you want me to read it out again?
Yeah, read them again.
Okay, question number 1. There is a spectrum with fight and reform this system on one end and remove this system and build a different one on the other end. Where are you on this spectrum? What places you there? And where do you want to be? And what will it take to get there? Okay, that's the first question we want to deal with. Does anyone have any thoughts? I can start out. I think I'm on the remove the system and build a different one. Because just as with police departments, I don't think you can solve a problem with the same thinking that created it. That was Einstein's. That was a paraphrase, but I just don't think. I think it's going to take a couple of generations actually, because it's hard for people to envision what a new system would be like that have lived in the old system for their whole lives. And I mean, most of us are pretty set in our ways. But I'd love to see the whole thing just come down and start over.
There'll be some sort of counter-revolution, even if we do manage to get rid of every police department in the whole country. Somebody will reinvent it again, private security or something will come along. The pattern is still there. It'll still come back to some extent, but
right.
You can make progress in that direction and keep it from going all the way back as well.
On the spectrum of reform or remove, I tend to be pragmatic and say, you know, what are the likelihood that you just reset, complete reset? So I can see the way that the election is turning out to be, you know, in November with Biden. You know, he's not going to be one to remove. He's going to want to reform. So, you know, I think that that's probably where I stand. You know, is to push for meaningful reforms, because you know, I don't see how going from A to where we want to be is going to be like a quantum leap. Don't see it.
I feel like if we're going to build a new system, we need to be much more inclusive to everyone that has a voice. And that may actually change a system into working for the welfare of people. Because I agree with you, I'm on that spectrum that wants to just 86 it and let's get down to brass tacks. And I agree, Biden is not there. He wants to sort of be on the cusp, whether that is a corporate, he's not there, but I think he's going to have some beautiful words that he's going to say about the well-being for all people. Whether he's going to do anything, I'm not clear. But I would love to see it disappear and bring a lot more people into the decision-making instead of the white guys. And by the way, I'd also like to see a women's party. And men can join it, but I would like to see another party other than the Democrats and the Republicans. And I'd like it to be a women's party. I want compassion back.
Mm-hmm.
Unspoken.
Interesting.
I'd be the first one to join the women's party.
I know. I'm hoping so.
Yeah, we hope so. Gwen Lynn.
Oh, yeah.
So anyone else?
Yeah, I find myself thinking about how fractured the country has, how fractured it is to just trying to deal with the COVID, and I just don't see how. I don't know how equipped we are to deal with things, because we've just fractured the whole COVID thing so horribly. I don't know. I mean, I don't know where to go with that, but that's the thought that came up in my head as we were asked this question.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is that because of COVID, we're all stuck even more tightly in with the little inner circles that we normally have, which means less diversity. And also, a lot of the service workers are the ones also being asked to bear the brunt of the risk. So they're still having to, you know, cook and clean and do all the things that are suddenly essential, or we can't live without it, and yet they're being asked to bear the brunt of it, and yet do they get paid more? No, they just have to work harder and be scared on top of it. So
even teachers,
it's gonna, you know, it's gonna cause more disharmony in a lot of ways, unless white people can do some pretty heavy duty lifting right now on our own selves.
Yeah.
It's scary. It does worry me that we're being more insular at a moment when we need to be caring about each other. And we can't even, I've been thinking about the word mutuality a lot, and that we have to be caring about the other person. This pandemic has made us, the mask isn't to protect me. I have to be caring about the other person in order to wear the mask. And that tells us almost immediately, like, where somebody is in their maturity and their ability to understand how it is.
Probably leaving the dark now.
And so it teaches us how we have to, that's where we have to start, at this very, very basic level of, and I think how we raise children is always power over. We've taught them that since infancy. Power over, I have power over you, instead of power with. And so with mutuality, it's a sense of doing things together for the common good. Like, we've lost these words, common good, out of our, you know, out of the word. You know, we don't hear that anymore. And so we have to really think about common good really means common for everybody. And these billionaires just making more and more money, we have to stop being lazy. We have to stop buying from Amazon. We have to stop, you know, we have to make choices. Like, remember with in the 70s or the 80s where we had the grape boycotts and things like that. I mean, like, you know, there are things we can do that can make a difference.
Well, I think we're talking about consciousness, that we look around ourselves in the lives that we're leading and look for places where we aren't as conscious as we can be, and then bring our behavior into line with that.
Amen.
Yeah.
We all have to start within ourselves first. That's the only place we can go. That's the only place, that's it. Like, I mean, that's the biggest miracle, right? Is change of heart within ourselves.
Viktor Frankl said the only choice we really have is the freedom of, the only freedom we really have is the freedom to choose our attitude. This has been a very enlightening evening.
Yeah.
Meaty.
What Resma, you know, derek was talking about Resma Menachem a moment ago, and what Resma is putting out is how some people are you know, I'm distracted. There are just people who just come to visit friends. So, all right. Let me
Talking
give
about
that.
Risma.
Yeah.
The book is called Grandmother's Hands, right?
Right, Mike.
Right now I'm taking his online course.
Okay.
And called 101. It's called something like Racism 101 or something like that.
Okay.
he's talking about how we, as white people, you know, Derek was talking about the white body supremacy. He's talking about how, as white people, what we need to get to terms with is our own moral injury. And that the moral injury is what makes it that the white fragility of white people. The fragility comes from the fact that we have no stamina to deal with race, to confront race. And that the moment race, you know, racial issues get brought up, there is this constriction of the body, this recoil, you know, that's happening. And he's tracing that to this moral injury, which I'm starting to understand how, you know, the human beings have a kind of a moral compass. And so when you are, you know, in all those cases where white people witnessed lynching or the horrors of imposed on slavery, the treatment of black, or even today, you know, when you see someone being killed, there is part of our moral compass that is actually rebelled. So there is this moral energy that courses through our being. At the same time, you know, you hear it's okay, you know, it's sanctioned by the state. You know, the lynching was sanctioned by the state. It was, yeah, it's okay, let's go celebrate, you know, lynching. So you have this cross current of energy that that as bodies we are unable to deal with. So it gets stuck in our bodies, and that's how this stuckness is what makes the white people mostly unable to deal with racism. So that until we start doing the inner work of, and he says it, he's saying it cannot be done by yourself. You have to do it in community. You have to do it by creating a new culture, co-creating a new culture of acknowledging and noticing your body reaction when you hear another white person share about their reaction to racism, and to start recognize and acknowledge the fact that we have this stuckness caused by this conflict that we have experienced. And for me, like going from Europe, from centuries, you know, whatever happened in my ancestors when they were colonizing Africa, what moral injury, you know, so this is something like we have to deal with as white people, you know, because people of color have to deal with other injuries, and we cannot help them dealing with that, but we can help if we deal with our own
ourselves.
Excuse me?
Yeah, a lot of people, Rev D says sort of the same thing, that we have to get past our guilt and shame for whatever our ancestors have done.
Yeah, and that's why, I mean, more and more you see these small groups happening. And in the work I'm doing in Santa Cruz with the Racial Equity Traders Network and the book circles and all the clubs that we've done, is there is more and more people working as a small group to as caucus group, you know, like white people working together and people of color working together to actually deal with this, how the trauma, the historical trauma that we have embedded in our bodies, either as moral injury for white folks or actually oppression, physical oppression for people of color.
So, thank you. Alain's next, Derek's next question Question 2 is, how might you increase your awareness of these systemic injustices? Not just intellectually, but emotionally and physically also. What core beliefs stand in your way? And that's it. To me, that's a very interesting question. I've been doing a lot of reading of historical fiction that is around my ancestors, essentially. I have a very detailed genealogy that goes back quite a long way. And so I know where a lot of my ancestors came from. And I've been reading about periods and in history in places where my ancestors were, to understand what they lived through, politically and physically. You know, the wars, they were constantly a war. And the amount of violence in their lives seemed absurd. But to read those stories made me more aware of where I came from and what just generally what white people have been doing for centuries. And it's, even if it's not actual historical record, historical novels are usually built from the records that were available of the time about which they're written. So it's a way to immerse oneself in what one's ancestors lived through. And it's been very educational and very emotional sometimes, reading those books. I just find that, you know, you can read nonfiction, but fiction in a lot of ways makes it a lot more real. So that's one way that I'm increasing my awareness of systemic injustices, which have gone back as far as history goes. So.
Thank you, Polly.
I don't know how other people do it.
I want to learn more about trauma and the effects of trauma, and because it really is generational trauma. And being in therapy, like, you know, just like layers and layers and layers of just one person's life, and to think of how we're living with this collective trauma on so many different levels. How to just understand that and sensitize myself, you know, to that, and yeah, and then how to be a healing, you know, presence in the world, knowing that.
Yeah, Resma is talking about healing as going to be a slow process. He said you have to take it slow.
Yeah.
Because it's so embedded, it's not something that you can do with a quick read or understanding. It's not going to happen at the level of the mind and the knowledge. It's going to happen by creating a new culture, co-creating a new culture, and that takes time, and it can only happen in community. So we have a lot to learn, right now on how to deal with this, and so yeah, certainly the COVID is not helping us in that way, but in another way, it's giving a chance to do some internal work. I'm using it myself too, with a lot of reading, talking about fiction. I mean, right now this is not a fiction, but I'm reading Michelle Obama, Becoming,
Yeah. And I love that book.
And I love her book. But I became motivated to read her book after I watched the documentary Becoming. All right. So I decided, because Nancy said she was doing the book on whatever with someone else so then I said, okay, I'm going to watch it. So I was watching it in the morning, because I get up early in the morning and before Nancy is up. So anyway, I'm watching it and I'm totally mesmerized by the documentary I'm talking about. All right.
Yeah.
And then she comes up from from a bedroom, and then I'm telling her I'm just reading. I'm just watching the Becoming, and I said, it is so beautiful. And in my saying those words, all of a sudden, I broke down, sobbing. And I said, whoa, what's happening with me? And that to me is another indication of the moral injury and the stuckness. This is a body reaction. My body all of a sudden released something that I didn't know was there.
Yeah.
Until then, I was just interested. And all of a sudden I shared. So it all upon me, but in a process of sharing in small group, but that's me sharing with Nancy how beautiful it was. All of a sudden, my body released something. So to me, this is all pointing out to a new direction to work.
Yeah.
It's something to investigate. Like, in what way have we been traumatized, but not in the same way as people of color have been traumatized, but in our own invalidation of our moral compass.
Right.
Nice.
Yeah, when I met Lee Moon-Wah, who did the film The Color of Fear, and he pointed out to us in Milwaukee, and he picked out who are some famous German musicians, and the way he said it, everybody I don't know. And he's like, what about Mozart? And he's starts listing all these, we disassociate ourselves with our cultural ethnic identity in so many ways, and give up our languages, and in order to fit in.
Yeah, I mean, definitely there is tremendous moral injury in the people in this country of having had to forget where they're from. So you're right, Polly, that sometimes like we can reconnect with the emotional aspect of that through fiction, if it's well done.
It is amazing to me how stories still carry so much. We can learn a lot from story, and there's a certain magic about that, and even in film and things. But I think it is a very powerful method for us to transmit the feelings and understandings and move, and transform in a shorter time. I think you're right, but it's also so embedded, it's so embodied. There's so many levels, but we have to start somewhere, and that's certainly a place to begin. And even like that Robin Wall Kimmerer book, Braiding Sweetgrass, like they had a completely different way of being in the world that was so much more in harmony. And like when we talk about having something completely, it's almost like we wouldn't even, it's already been created how to do that. It's that we got to get out of this muck we're in.
Maybe we should go back and ask the Native Americans what to do at this juncture.
I was just thinking about that,
Yeah, me too. And actually, for the last 3 years, we've been really dealing with social injustice issues with the Bioneers people who bring out women of color. It started out as like 50% white, black, and now it became apparent that it was not the best way to do it. It became 70%. And then the last year, doing the storytelling blanket with Anna Sophia, which most of you are familiar with, maybe Mary and Alex are not, but anyway, then it became clear that what they wanted is 90% black and 10% white folks to be involved on the trauma release. And it was just an extraordinary, I was taking part in some of those things. And I have to say, for me, it was such a learning and so painful and difficult at times. But the reality is, when I said to one of the black women, what can I do to repair this? What is it that will in any way start the repair mechanism? And she literally is a 60-something-year-old, literally sat down and cried. And she said, nobody's ever asked me in my entire life that they wanted to repair this. And that was so startling, because this is a person that, that leads workshops all over the world as a black woman. But the reality was, she said, nobody has ever asked me how to repair it. And so those are the kind of conversations I think we could have, is really, from their standpoint, is there a starting point there where we can become more human or more, God knows what the word is, but is there a place where we can become down to understanding what it is that's needed, not just from a white perspective, but what is needed in this case? And that's kind of where I'm in that question all the time now. And I don't have the Bioneers people now that we're in COVID coming here, although I'm in great conversations with that particular black woman. And but the reality is, COVID has changed things in that standpoint, but not in the emotional development of all of us to really be in that understanding of what trauma is. I think Mary had a great thing, because that's really what Anna Sophia is writing a book about right now, is the storytelling blankets response to trauma, intergenerational trauma. And I think there is a responsibility for us to come forward and understand a little bit more, and what is it we personally, as individuals and as a group, the Pachamama group, what can we do to start the repair? Is there some idea in our group what that repair might be? Are we not there yet?
Okay. Overwhelmed. I feel overwhelmed.
Yeah. I mean, I'm concerned about something like that, at least for me, turning into white man save people. And I'm.
Yeah. We're in the down on your knees. Sorry. Much more like, what can I do? This is horrendous. Coming into reality of I'm sorry. It's more like I'm really sorry, because it's not from the heart. It's like, what can I do? Because some of the pain is so bad. Some of the trauma is so bad. That's where I'm coming from. Definitely not. And that's the Pachamama thing. If you're coming to help us, don't bother. If you're coming to understand that our futures are entwined, please welcome, that kind of thing. So yeah.
Saying what can we do to fix it isn't gonna
Yeah. No, because it's coming from an emotional. It's emotional.
change how we go forward.
Yeah.
Well, reconciliation is about seeing eyelash to eyelash, how we have to look closely.
Right.
And, like butterfly kisses, it's super close, and getting to know each other. And yeah, first, how do you start reconciliation? Saying, I'm sorry.
Somewhere.
Yeah. Thanks, chaps. Big hugs.
Cyber hugs. Okay, here we go back to the big group here.
See you in the big room. There we are. We're not been joined by the others yet.
Oh, good. Well, they must be in a really intense conversation.
I want to give you little butterfly kisses.
Yeah, right up against the screen. Yeah.
Not very COVID friendly behavior.
We've got a screen between us. It's quite safe.
Very big piece of glass. Yes, several miles thick.
I have to say, Cecily and Polly, thank you so much for not eating cake on camera.
Just think when we get back together again, we'll have the biggest cake and the biggest party, biggest celebration. Oh,
Size does matter, huh?
There we go. So any comments about that session or any comments about the entire evening? Because we're getting time to wrap up here. So last call for comments.
Well, your questions were really good, Derek, and let's see.
I really like Jody's point about it's not about fixing the problem as much as it is about repairing the relationships.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I don't think that had quite occurred to me in that way until tonight.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
I've said a couple times tonight, it's about healthy relationships. That means we don't have healthy relationships right now, and that points to we need to heal those relationships. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Well, once again, I'd just like to thank everybody. We talked about it in our breakout room, but I also feel that way with the whole group, that it's just so nice to be able to come together with like-minded people and to have a conversation that is, meaningful and respectful and intelligent. It's kind of nice. Unfortunately, not all of mine are, so this is a treat for me.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you.
Yeah, and I think the background information that both of you showed tonight, especially the barber stuff, really speaks to me. But excellent context setting for our breakouts. I thought the breakouts were really good sized team to be able to have everybody talk and voice opinions. And I mean, I think that, I talked in our breakout that, sometimes if you think about changing the whole system, it can be really overwhelming. And so it's like, okay, we parse it all apart and then we work on stuff. And Derek's like, no, one conversation at a time. So it's like, okay, I can do that. So it's like, it doesn't have to be overwhelming, right? Overwhelming causes being overwhelmed causes inaction. So yeah. I just, while we were on, I just signed a change.org, petition about a $250,000 military vehicle in Campbell, California.
I put that up there too.
Yep.
It's craziness.
Yeah. Crazy.
Nuts.
Derek, could you post your piece, the presentation you made? I scribbled some notes, but not very.
Yeah, I'll send it out. Yeah.
Bless you. I'd appreciate that.
Thank you.
Got Holly's. It's right here.
I want to bring up something that puts things in perspective. About it came up in our group about not getting separated, and during all movements, you know, we can be divided. You all know that we had a couple of our progressive city council people recalled in a very nasty campaign in Santa Cruz. And I remember meeting, I met with both Chris and Drew afterwards, but I worked really heavily on those campaigns. And I told Drew afterwards, I said, you know what, this is going to be a blessing. I mean, you've got work to do on the outside that can be so much more valuable. And he called me, 3 days ago. Mm-hmm. And, you know, he's moved to Selma where he was doing this work. And he has been hired now at a well-paying job in Selma for the Jubilee that they're going to have next year. This is for the civil rights, you know, the crossing of the bridge. And he's now in touch with all his civil rights icons around the country.
Oh, wow.
And he asked me to be on the executive board, and we talked about bringing in Chase Iron Eyes and Madonna Thunderhawk and Dolores Huerta and all my contacts into that. And it's just so great to see somebody land on his feet. He was just vilified with all this nasty lying stuff. And now he's just so excited and right where he needs to be in Selma, Alabama during COVID. And he's going to buy a home, you know, which is they had in process there so that people from Santa Cruz can go back and forth and have this kind of off the record sister city relationship. So
it's beautiful.
A bit of good news.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what? I'll just say that all that we've been talking about tonight also, it can be really uncomfortable, like what he went through. As we really face and look and move through stuff to create something where we will also land and create something thriving and beautiful. But we have to move through it and be willing to have those conversations. And that's what changes everything.
Yeah. And just, you know, he's in touch with Reverend Barber, all these folks. And in addition to planning for the actual site there, you know, I have contact with a friend who just does these global things with Zoom and stuff. So he's going to get involved to do it virtually. So we will have that. We will be able to participate in that next February.
Cool.
From wherever we are in the world.
Great.
Awesome night.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Derek.
Thank you very
you.
much.
I really appreciate every single one of you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you for organizing it, all of you organizers.
Yes.
Thank
Stay
you.
safe, everyone.
This is a wonderful
And
nest
This
that we have.
Jody's initiation. Thank you, Jody.
It was
Yes.
very rich.
That's very
Thank
good.
you, thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
The schedule
Oh, right. Jody's the one that
initiated.
instigated this.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Polly, can you give me a
Thank you,
phone call
Jody.
after this is done? After we sign off, give me a phone call.
Oh,
Yeah.
Polly.
Yeah, and can I say one thing? You just reminded me. I was looking at our calendar and I was thinking, you know, we got into this whole thing when we were designing the calendar this year. It was before COVID. And so we have all these incredible, great ideas about, oh, the election, we're going to sing and we're going to fast and we're going to do all this great stuff. And I'm wondering about reigniting that conversation about what we're going to do now during COVID, because I think it's a little different. Because, you know, I just thought I was just really crazy to try to go into the homeless garden thing and try to do a whatever, you know, and then also ask for money. And that just was, we just did that, it seems like, with the farm workers. So I just thought there's got to be maybe a new look at some of our calendar, and maybe some of those places could be used for these current event things, which seem to be happening pretty rapidly. And it seems like maybe we want to do an election thing, and I don't think we have that on the schedule. So I just want to put
But
that.
you
I
know,
would second that, yeah.
this was the only one that was really questionable, is doing the doing the garden project, because everything else now is still absolutely appropriate in a Zoom format.
That's true.
Yeah, I just thought the singing one might not be. The singing one is in November.
Singing?
Singing. We were going to get these six. Len and I and Carol were going to do that with was
Oh
singing,
yeah. Okay. Yeah. This one.
singing
This
and
one.
feeling great. So I thought, oh,
This one.
we might have put some like current events on that one, or some.
Yeah, yeah.
That will be after the election, you know, so
Mhm.
you
Know
might
that.
be talking
It might
about
be
the pieces. Yeah.
But it might be some incredible conversations about what needs to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, either way. Mhm.
And
That's
right now
perfect.
so we don't have to do the homeless garden. We could keep October as current issues and then see where we are in October. And if we need to talk about the election coming up,
Perfect.
right?
Right.
Good idea.
So the next one is toxic masculinity with
Ooh.
Marcia and Norman. Do you think they're going to be up to doing that? Given somebody was talking about
I
Norman's
don't know.
health.
We need to
Uh-huh.
we need to talk.
Someone
you
needs
know.
to, I'll contact Marsha. We'll try again. Polly has tried.
Yeah, we'll try again to contact them.
And
If you go for a week and you don't get through, let me know and we'll figure out something else too,
okay,
Yeah.
great, Derek.
in
Thank
terms of reaching out to them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Super.
Okay.
Thank you
Hey.
so much.
Everybody.
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
Everyone, please be well. Be
Bye.
well.
See you.
Good to
We'll
see
talk to
you.
you
Nice to
again
see you,
soon.
Jack.
Yes.
Big hugs.
Hey, well,
Bye bye.
bye bye.
Ciao.
It was good to.
Ciao.
It was good to see you, Jackie.
Yes, and you too. I miss you all. I can't wait to be in the room, but that could be a while.
All right. Are
All
you
right,
doing?
love you all.
Are you doing okay in Chicago?
Oh, I am. I actually am. Yes. And I'll be here for about 2 more weeks and then I'm leaving and going back via trailer, back via Portland to see Katie. You still there? Yeah.
Nice.
So, yeah, I'm doing well.
And your mom
It's-
is okay?
My mom is okay. Yep, she's doing okay. We're making some progress. We're, things are changing slightly, shifting in a good ways.
All right.
Good.
All right. All right. Well,
Super.
Thank
good
you.
night, everyone.
Good
Night,
night.
night. Love you.
Night, everybody.
Polly, I was just going to ask, what are you going to do? How are you going to handle the recording? Where are we going to put that up where people can see it?
I don't know. Can we put it on Google Docs or Google Drive?
If we get it up on Google Drive, I can put it on my own YouTube channel and then send out a link to everybody.
For tonight's meeting, that'd be
Yeah.
fabulous.
Recording, yeah.
And Polly, why don't you go ahead and turn off the recording now?
Okay. Stop.